When people hear the word prison, they often imagine bars, cells, and long sentences. What they rarely imagine is the moment it begins, the intake process. Prison intake is the first doorway into incarceration, and for many, it is one of the most shocking and dehumanizing experiences of their lives. Intake is not just paperwork. It is the moment when freedom is formally taken away. Personal clothes are removed and replaced with a uniform that erases individuality. Names are often replaced with identification numbers. What once defined a person, their job, family role, or personality, suddenly feels irrelevant. For many individuals, intake is also a moment of overwhelming fear and confusion. People arrive not knowing what to expect, unsure of how they will survive in an unfamiliar and often hostile environment. The noise, the commands, the locked doors, and the constant surveillance send a clear message. You are no longer in control. Mental health challenges are common at intake. Anxiety, depression, withdrawal from substances, and trauma often collide all at once. Yet intake facilities are rarely equipped to offer immediate emotional support. Instead, vulnerability is often met with indifference, reinforcing feelings of isolation and hopelessness. The intake process also highlights inequality. Those who are poor, uneducated, or from marginalized communities are more likely to be confused by legal procedures and less able to advocate for themselves. Language barriers and lack of legal knowledge can turn intake into a deeply unfair experience. However, intake is also a critical moment, one that can shape the entire prison experience. When handled with care, it can be a point of assessment, support, and preparation for rehabilitation. When handled poorly, it becomes the first step in a cycle of dehumanization and recidivism. Understanding the reality of prison intake forces us to confront a difficult truth. How we treat people at their lowest moment reflects who we are as a society. If the goal of incarceration is rehabilitation, then intake should be about more than control. It should be about dignity, safety, and the possibility of change. Life behind bars does not begin with a sentence. It begins at intake. And how that beginning is handled can determine whether prison becomes a place of growth or a place where hope is stripped away. Prison intake is the moment when incarceration truly begins, and its impact often outweighs anything that comes after. For many individuals, intake is their first direct encounter with a rigid, controlled system that strips away personal autonomy in a matter of hours. From the moment a person enters the facility, every action is dictated. When to stand, where to walk, when to speak, and when to remain silent. This sudden loss of control creates a powerful psychological shock that can leave lasting effects. During intake, individuals are searched, photographed, fingerprinted, questioned, and processed in ways that feel invasive and overwhelming. Personal belongings are confiscated, often without clear explanations of when or if they will be returned. Clothing is replaced with standardized prison attire, a symbolic act that removes individuality and reinforces the idea that personal identity no longer matters. This transition happens quickly, giving individuals little time to mentally prepare for what is happening to them. The environment itself intensifies the experience. Intake areas are frequently loud, crowded, and tense, filled with people who are frightened, angry, confused, or emotionally numb. Officers issue rapid commands, doors slam shut, and surveillance cameras constantly monitor movement. For someone unfamiliar with the system, this atmosphere can feel hostile and threatening, making intake not just a procedural step, but an emotional and psychological turning point. What makes intake especially impactful is that it sets the tone for everything that follows. First impressions of authority, safety, and fairness are formed during this stage. If intake is harsh, dismissive, or chaotic, individuals may develop distrust, fear, or resentment toward the system from the very beginning. These feelings can influence how they interact with staff, follow rules, and cope with confinement. Intake is also when stress, anxiety, and uncertainty peak as individuals confront the reality of separation from family, loss of freedom, and an unknown future, all compressed into a short and intense period of processing point. One of the most immediate and painful realities of prison intake is the loss of personal identity. From the very beginning, the system is designed to treat individuals as units to be processed rather than as people with unique histories, relationships, and experiences. This shift happens quickly and deliberately, reinforcing the idea that individuality has little place within the prison environment. During intake, people are required to surrender personal belongings that once represented who they were: clothing, jewelry, photographs, letters, and sometimes even religious items. These objects often carry emotional meaning and connections to life outside prison. Taking them away is not just a security measure. It creates a psychological separation from one's former self and previous life. The replacement of personal clothing with a uniform further emphasizes this loss, as everyone is made to look the same, regardless of background, age, or circumstances. Names, which are central to personal identity, are frequently replaced with identification numbers. Individuals may be referred to by these numbers in official interactions, paperwork, and even daily routines. This practice reduces a person's identity to a code and a system, making it easier to overlook their individuality. Over time, being called by a number rather than a name can lead to feelings of invisibility and emotional detachment. Freedom, in its most basic form, is also stripped away during intake. Simple choices, when to eat, where to sit, when to use the restroom, or when to sleep, are no longer personal decisions. Every movement requires permission or instruction. This sudden and total loss of control can be deeply unsettling, especially for individuals who have never experienced such restrictions before. The intake process teaches this loss of identity and freedom through repetition and structure. Standing in lines, following shouted commands, and adhering to strict schedules reinforce the message that compliance is expected and resistance has consequences. This conditioning begins immediately, shaping how individuals see themselves and their place within the prison system. The result is not just physical confinement, but a profound psychological adjustment that begins the moment intake starts. For many individuals, prison intake is an emotional experience marked by intense fear, deep confusion, and psychological shock. These emotions often hit all at once, creating a sense of emotional overload that is difficult to process. Intake is usually fast-paced and highly structured, leaving little time for individuals to understand what is happening or to mentally prepare for the reality they are facing. Fear is one of the strongest emotions present during intake. People fear for their personal safety, unsure of how they will be treated by correctional officers or other inmates. Stories, rumors, and media portrayals of prison life often intensify these fears, causing individuals to imagine worst-case scenarios. The uncertainty of where they will be housed, who they will be placed with, and what rules they might unknowingly break adds to this sense of danger. For some, fear is also tied to concern for family members left behind and the consequences of sudden separation. Confusion is equally overwhelming. Intake procedures involve complex instructions, legal terminology, and rapid questioning that many individuals do not fully understand. Exhaustion, stress, and emotional distress make it difficult to concentrate or ask questions. People are often moved from one area to another without clear explanations, signing documents they barely comprehend. Those with limited education, language barriers, or cognitive challenges may feel especially lost, increasing their vulnerability during this stage. Shock sets in as the reality of incarceration becomes unavoidable. What may have once felt temporary or unreal suddenly becomes permanent and inescapable. The sound of cell doors closing, the removal of personal belongings, and the physical barriers of the facility create a powerful realization that life has fundamentally changed. This shock can cause emotional numbness, panic, or withdrawal, as the mind struggles to cope with the sudden loss of freedom and control. These emotional responses are not signs of weakness. They are natural reactions to an abrupt and life-altering situation. The intake environment often does little to ease these feelings, instead reinforcing them through strict routines, impersonal treatment, and constant surveillance. As fear, confusion, and shock take hold, they shape how individuals perceive the prison system from the very beginning, influencing their emotional state and behavior throughout incarceration. The prison intake process frequently feels dehumanizing because it is built around absolute control and constant surveillance. From the moment individuals enter the facility, they're subjected to rules and monitoring that leave little room for personal dignity or privacy. Every movement is observed, recorded, and regulated, creating an environment where people feel more like objects being managed than human beings being processed. During intake, individuals are ordered where to stand, when to move, and how to behave, often with little explanation. Commands are delivered quickly and firmly, and hesitation or misunderstanding can result in reprimands. This lack of communication reinforces a power imbalance, where authority is unquestioned and individuals are expected to comply without hesitation. Even basic actions such as making eye contact, speaking out of turn, or moving too slowly can be seen as violations, increasing stress and self-consciousness. Surveillance plays a major role in this experience. Cameras monitor nearly every area, including intake halls, holding cells, and corridors. In some cases, individuals are searched in ways that feel invasive, with little regard for personal boundaries. The awareness of being constantly watched creates a sense of vulnerability and exposure, making it difficult to feel safe or respected. Privacy, a fundamental aspect of human dignity, is largely non-existent during intake. The standardized routines of intake further contribute to dehumanization. People are lined up, processed in groups, and move through procedures with minimal personal interaction. Questions are often limited to basic identification and compliance, rather than understanding personal needs or circumstances. This mechanical approach sends a clear message that individuality is irrelevant and that personal experiences do not matter within the system. Over time, this strict control and surveillance can alter how individuals see themselves. Being treated as a body to be monitored rather than a person to be understood can lead to feelings of worthlessness, humiliation, and emotional detachment. Intake becomes more than an administrative process. It becomes a lesson in power, obedience, and loss of agency that leaves a lasting psychological imprint on those who experience it. Mental health struggles are extremely common among individuals entering prison, yet the intake process often fails to address them in a meaningful way. Many people arrive already dealing with anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress, substance dependence, or other psychological conditions. The stress of arrest, court proceedings, and sudden confinement only intensifies these issues, making intake one of the most emotionally fragile moments in a person's life. At intake, individuals may be experiencing panic attacks, emotional breakdowns, withdrawal symptoms, or suicidal thoughts. Despite this, the focus of the process is typically on security and efficiency rather than mental well-being. Screenings, when they exist, are often brief and superficial, relying on quick questions that may not capture the severity of a person's condition. In a crowded and intimidating environment, many individuals are afraid to admit mental health struggles, fearing stigma, punishment, or being placed in isolation. The lack of immediate mental health support can have serious consequences. Individuals who are already vulnerable may feel completely overwhelmed, especially when they are given no space to process their emotions or ask for help. The intake environment, with its noise, strict rules, and lack of privacy, can worsen symptoms of anxiety and trauma. For those with a history of abuse or institutionalization, intake procedures can trigger painful memories and emotional distress. Substance withdrawal is another major mental health challenge often overlooked during intake. Many individuals enter prison dependent on drugs or alcohol, and withdrawal symptoms can be both physically and psychologically dangerous. Without proper monitoring and care, individuals may suffer intense fear, hallucinations, depression, or medical emergencies. When these symptoms are misunderstood as behavioral problems rather than health issues, Individuals may be punished instead of helped. Ignoring mental health needs at intake sends a message that emotional suffering is unimportant within the prison system. This neglect can deepen feelings of isolation, hopelessness, and mistrust, shaping how individuals cope with incarceration from the very start. When mental health struggles are dismissed or minimized at intake, the system misses a critical opportunity to provide care, prevent harm, and stabilize individuals during one of the most vulnerable moments of their lives. Intake facilities are rarely designed to provide meaningful emotional and psychological support, even though they process individuals at one of the most vulnerable points in their lives. The primary goal of intake is efficiency and security, not care, which means emotional needs are often treated as secondary or ignored entirely. As a result, many individuals pass through intake without receiving any reassurance, guidance, or mental health assistance. Staff members are typically overworked and responsible for managing large numbers of people at once. This environment leaves little time for personal interaction or careful observation of emotional distress. Signs of anxiety, fear, or emotional collapse may go unnoticed or be viewed as disruptions rather than cries for help. In some cases, individuals are discouraged from expressing emotions, as vulnerability can be seen as weakness or non-compliance within the system. When psychological evaluations are conducted, they are often brief and focused on identifying immediate risks rather than providing support. Individuals may be asked standardized questions that fail to capture the complexity of their mental state. There is rarely an opportunity for in-depth conversations, counseling, or emotional grounding during intake. Those who do request help may face delays or be placed on long waiting lists, leaving them to cope alone during the most intense early days of incarceration. The physical environment of intake facilities also contributes to the lack of support. Harsh lighting, cold holding areas, constant noise, and limited privacy create conditions that heighten stress rather than reduce it. There are few, if any, spaces designed for calming, reflection, or emotional stabilization. Instead of feeling supported, individuals often feel rushed, overwhelmed, and invisible. This absence of emotional and psychological support can have long-term effects. Individuals who enter prison without their mental health needs acknowledged may struggle to adjust, develop trust issues, or adopt defensive behaviors as a form of self-protection. Intake becomes a missed opportunity to identify vulnerability, prevent self-harm, and set a foundation for healthier coping. The lack of support at this early stage reinforces the idea that survival, not healing, is the primary expectation within the prison system. Social inequality heavily influences how individuals experience prison intake, shaping their level of understanding, treatment, and ability to navigate the system. People do not enter intake on equal footing. Their socioeconomic background, education level, race, and access to resources all affect how prepared they are for the process. For many from marginalized communities, intake is not only intimidating, but deeply unfair. Individuals from low-income backgrounds are often less familiar with legal procedures and institutional systems. During intake, this lack of knowledge can result in confusion and mistakes, such as misunderstanding instructions or failing to complete paperwork correctly. These errors may be interpreted as non-compliance rather than lack of understanding, leading to disciplinary consequences early in incarceration. Without legal guidance or advocacy, these individuals have little ability to protect themselves within the system. Race and ethnicity also play a significant role in shaping intake experiences. Bias, whether conscious or unconscious, can influence how individuals are spoken to, searched, and disciplined. People from marginalized racial groups may experience harsher treatment, greater suspicion, or less patience from staff. These early interactions can reinforce feelings of injustice and mistrust, especially for those who have already experienced discrimination outside the prison system. Education level further deepens inequality during intake. Individuals with limited literacy may struggle to read forms, understand rules, or grasp the consequences of what they are signing. Fear of embarrassment often prevents them from asking for help, increasing their vulnerability. At the same time, individuals with higher education or access to legal knowledge are better able to advocate for themselves, ask questions, and navigate intake procedures with less difficulty. Social inequality also affects emotional resilience. Those who have lived in unstable environments may enter intake already traumatized, while others with stronger support systems and financial resources may cope more effectively. Intake does not account for these differences. Instead, it applies the same rigid process to everyone, ignoring unequal starting points. This imbalance ensures that for many, intake is not just a procedural step, but another moment where social inequality is reinforced rather than addressed. Language barriers and limited legal knowledge significantly intensify the stress and confusion of prison intake. For individuals who do not speak the dominant language fluently, intake can feel overwhelming and frightening, as critical information is delivered rapidly using complex terminology. Instructions, questions, and warnings are often given without interpretation, leaving individuals unsure of what is being asked of them or what is expected. When people cannot fully understand spoken commands or written documents, they are at a higher risk of making mistakes during intake. These mistakes, such as responding incorrectly, signing forms without comprehension, or failing to follow instructions, can lead to disciplinary action or delays in processing. Rather than recognizing the communication barrier, the system may interpret these errors as defiance or lack of cooperation, increasing stress and punishment for the individual. A lack of legal knowledge compounds this problem. Many individuals entering prison do not understand their legal rights, the meaning of the documents they are required to sign, or the procedures that will affect their incarceration. Intake often involves waivers, classifications, and disclosures that can have long-term consequences, yet explanations are minimal or rushed. People may unknowingly agree to conditions that impact their housing placement, visitation rights, or access to programs. Fear and embarrassment often prevent individuals from asking questions. Those who struggle with language or legal understanding may worry about appearing ignorant or attracting negative attention from staff or other inmates. This silence increases vulnerability as individuals proceed through intake without clarity or support. In some cases, reliance on other inmates for information leads to misinformation and further confusion. The absence of adequate translation services or legal guidance during intake reinforces feelings of powerlessness. Individuals are expected to navigate a complex system without the tools needed to understand it, creating an experience marked by anxiety and helplessness. This lack of comprehension at intake can set the stage for ongoing difficulties throughout incarceration, as misunderstandings continue to shape interactions with the prison system. The way individuals are treated during prison intake can have profound and lasting effects on their overall experience, shaping whether incarceration becomes a path toward rehabilitation or a cycle of harm. Intake is more than just an administrative procedure. It is the first opportunity for correctional staff to establish the tone of confinement, communicate expectations, and begin addressing the needs of those entering the system. How this stage is handled can significantly impact an individual's mental health, behavior, and willingness to engage in programs designed to support rehabilitation. When intake is conducted with care, respect, and attention to both procedural and emotional needs, it can create a foundation for growth and adjustment. Staff who take the time to explain rules, provide clear instructions, and assess an individual's mental and physical health send a message that the system is not solely punitive. Even simple acts, listening to concerns, offering information about available programs, or ensuring that immediate medical and psychological needs are addressed, can reduce anxiety and foster trust. Individuals who feel seen and supported are more likely to engage positively with rehabilitation programs, follow rules, and develop coping strategies that reduce the risk of self-harm or recidivism. Conversely, when intake is handled poorly, marked by harsh treatment, indifference, or disorganization, it can exacerbate stress, trauma, and feelings of dehumanization. Individuals may enter the prison environment already feeling powerless, and early negative experiences can reinforce anger, resentment, or mistrust toward authority. This can lead to behavioral issues, withdrawal from programs, and difficulty adapting to prison life, creating a cycle where incarceration becomes more damaging than rehabilitative. The intake process also sets the stage for social dynamics inside the facility. Individuals who are confused, fearful, or unprepared may be more vulnerable to exploitation, bullying, or isolation, which can further harm mental health and decrease the likelihood of productive engagement. By contrast, intake that emphasizes assessment, orientation, and support can mitigate these risks and help individuals navigate prison life safely. In this way, intake is not merely the beginning of a sentence. It is a pivotal moment that can either contribute to personal growth and rehabilitation or intensify the harm caused by incarceration. How this stage is handled sends a powerful message about the goals of the prison system and the value placed on human dignity, personal development, and the possibility of change. The way a prison intake process is designed and executed serves as a mirror of society's values, particularly its commitment to dignity, fairness, and justice. When individuals are treated with respect, compassion, and understanding during this critical stage, it demonstrates that the justice system recognizes their humanity, even as it enforces accountability. A humane intake process does not imply leniency or disregard for rules. Rather, it acknowledges that the first interactions within a carceral system have long-lasting consequences for mental health, self-perception, and potential for rehabilitation. A humane intake process emphasizes transparency and communication. Individuals are informed about the steps being taken, the purpose behind each procedure, and their rights within the system. They are allowed to ask questions and are provided with clear, accessible explanations to reduce confusion and anxiety. Staff trained in emotional intelligence, de-escalation, and cultural competency can identify signs of distress, provide reassurance, and intervene when necessary, helping individuals feel that they are seen and respected rather than merely processed. This approach also addresses the psychological impact of incarceration. Intake should include assessments for mental health needs, substance dependence, and trauma, followed by timely interventions and referrals to appropriate resources. Individuals are offered guidance on navigating the facility, understanding the rules, and accessing programs designed to support personal growth. Even simple gestures, such as allowing brief contact with family or providing clear information about daily routines, contribute to a sense of stability and control, counteracting the disorientation and fear that are otherwise inherent in the process. Furthermore, a humane intake process mitigates the influence of social inequality, language barriers, and lack of legal knowledge. Providing interpreters, legal guidance, and educational support ensures that all individuals, regardless of background, can engage with the system on fair terms. This not only protects the rights of the incarcerated, but also reinforces the principle that justice should be equitable and impartial. Ultimately, the treatment of individuals at intake sets the tone for their entire prison experience. By prioritizing dignity, fairness, and support at this earliest stage, society signals that punishment does not require dehumanization, that accountability can coexist with compassion, and that the criminal justice system can be a place of potential rehabilitation rather than only confinement. A humane intake process is a concrete reflection of a society that values human life, respects individual rights, and strives to balance justice with care. In conclusion, life behind bars begins long before the prison sentence is fully served. It begins at intake. This critical moment shapes the emotional, psychological, and social experiences of every individual who enters the system. By understanding the realities of prison intake, the fear, the loss of identity, the inequalities, and the mental health challenges, we are reminded that how we treat people at their most vulnerable says a lot about our society. If incarceration is to serve any purpose beyond punishment, it must begin with dignity, fairness, and support, setting the foundation for rehabilitation rather than harm. Only then can we hope to create a system that balances justice with humanity.